Paul Metsa's Wall of Power TV is brought to you in part by Grey Wolf Lodge, your home away from home in the North Woods, and Norway Point, your year-round getaway on Pelican Lake.
I'm going down to Louisiana, give me a mojo hand. I'm going downtown to get a bottle of booze. Yes, mama don't care what I do. Good time, Charlie's back in town again. Now don't try to dance like Snake Ray. Last time I tried, got 30 days. It's a good time, Charlie's back in town again. Yeah, he is. I would love you, baby, till your toes turn red. I would love you, till mama ain't go to your head. I would love you, baby, Lord, all night, night. Wait till they can holler to the papa now, that's all right. That's all right.
That first record was something else. Paul Nelson, Tony knew Paul Nelson, got that together through the Little Sandy Review. If I remember correctly, we got this guy interested in the Nun of Nun Bush Shoes. This Ed Nun was a crazy son of a gun, man. He made his own microphones. He had this old Magnacord tape recorder, 2-track tape recorder. He hot-wired that sucker.
We got to Milwaukee, and it was sort of a strange situation. It was very straight-laced. We weren't allowed to swear, and we weren't allowed to drink, and it was sort of a cold place.
We went and did that session, and hell, we did 15 or 20 tunes in about 12 hours flat in this women's civic club there in overlooking Lake Michigan. I don't think he'd ever seen anything quite like us. He was used to doing Naki Parker and Doc Evans. He didn't really know what to make of three young white boys doing blues. I don't think he'd ever heard any blues before, to tell you the truth.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is a Metsamerica Wall of Power TV special. It is February 11th, 2022. We are in Palmer's Bar, one of the oldest bars in the Twin Cities on Cedar Avenue. This is a labor of love interview today with my friend and my hero, Spider John Koerner. Now, I've met over the years, had the chance to play with a lot of folks, and when I mentioned Spider John Koerner, Dave Ray, who is, as you know, a good friend of mine, the guys that go way back, like John Hammond Jr.,
sure,
have nothing but great things to say about you. What was like meeting a young John Hammond back then? Because he was such a pivotal player in the whole scene. It's such my favorite acoustic blues act to this day.
Yeah.
What was it like hearing a young John play?
He had become a friend with Dave, I remember. And I don't know any particular stories. You know, we hung out like that, and he's a real sweetheart, you know. And he had somewhat of a stuttering problem, which, like a lot of people who have stuttering problems, disappears when they sing.
Right.
You know. But I don't know if he's still doing it or not. He's a guy who loved being on the road.
Yeah.
As much as he could. And his father was
John Hammond Sr.
John Hammond Sr., who had, what is it, Capo?
Columbia.
Oh, Columbia.
I think the greatest talent scout in American music to this day. Discovered Billie Holiday, Count Basie, Benny Goodman, Pete Seeger, Bruce Springsteen, later Bob Dylan. We'll talk a little about that guy in a little bit. And right up through Stevie Ray Vaughan. Was a great, and also did a lot for social justice. And of course he did the Spiritual to Swing concert at Carnegie Hall, where he put together all of these blues greats, and he was trying to get Robert Johnson up. This was 1938. Yeah. And Johnson had recently died in that year, so they did put an acetate of Johnson on a phonograph player on the stage, and then years later, John Hammond was the guy to help that Robert Johnson, King of the Delta Blues, come out.
Okay.
So tell us a little bit about, and I'm sure you're tired of talking about it, but we gotta bring it up. So Bob Dylan speaks of you very fondly in Chronicles and has mentioned you over the years in interviews. So talk about when you met Bob. What was that like over in 10 O'Clock Scholar in Dinkytown?
Right. I don't remember any day that I met him, but he was part of the scene there. And in a sense, he was just one among us, you know. He rubbed some people wrong. I don't know if it's I don't know if you'd call it arrogance, but he had his own way of being.
Right.
And didn't worry about what other people thought. And I remember in particular, he played a song that he had written for me, and something was obvious. It was not like the rest of us. He was different with that kind of thing. It was clean and it was rich, you know, and all that was very interesting. We played occasionally in different places together, or with separately, but and one day he was gone, and of course he'd gone to New York.
Well, like I say, I know enough about the story. Dave Morton, who we've got to talk to about a little bit, because both you and I were good friends with Dave, and then I've gotten to meet Diamond Dave Whitaker over the last few years, and those were the two guys. Dylan was turned on to Woody Guthrie. Dave Whitaker gave him his book Bound for Glory. I don't know if he ever got it back. And then when Dylan decided to move to New York in January '61, Morton and Whitaker gave him a ride to the edge of town to hitchhike to New York. And as an Iron Ranger, I always like to say, who hitchhikes to New York in the middle of winter with a guitar case but an Iron Ranger? But let's talk a little bit more about Bob, because I heard a story from my friend Jack Pasternak. You know Jack, who played in Cats Under the Stars, the guitar player. He's a big fan of yours. We all are. We bow down to John Koerner.
Yeah, don't do no bowing.
I'm too old to bow anymore, but back when I could, I did. But anyway, John, he said, now we're jumping ahead a little bit, but you were playing in London, and Dylan brought Brian Jones to see you. And Brian said, he's a white guy? Because he was familiar with your music. Do you remember that?
Actually, some of that's wrong. This happened in New York City.
Oh, okay. Better yet.
The Kettle of Fish was the.
I've been there. I've
yeah.
been there. Right above the Gaslight on McDougal.
Right. That's right. Really, a lot of us musicians used to go down there, and also you could get a good meal.
Yeah.
But anyway, I was sitting in there, and he came in with Brian Jones, you say?
Yeah, of the Rolling Stones.
And all our, I don't know, we said one thing or another, and they walked away, and he turned to Dylan and he said, "That's Spider John Koerner, like."
Thought you were an old black guy.
Yeah.
That's fantastic. Well then, John, I'm not going to embarrass you too much, but I'm reading Esquire magazine 6-7 years ago when David Bowie was still walking the earth, and he named his influences and 10 of his favorite records, in Spider Blues by John Koerner was an influence on none other than David Bowie.
Okay. Once again, the thing I remember is a different type of incident.
Well, tell us.
But it sounds the same in a way. It was another magazine, but a popular magazine, and it was 25 favorite albums, and Blues, Rags, and Hollers was one of his. Now there may have been something else too, but that's what I.
Well, I think this was John, because he mentioned your record Spider Blues inspired him to get a 12-string guitar.
Oh, okay, wow.
And that was the first record I had by you.
Yeah.
Spider Blues with your cigar and those cool
Right.
shades.
Picture taken by Dave Garr, of course.
Was it? Well, I remember when I first met Spider John Koerner at Palmer's. I just moved to Minneapolis in '78. And it was great because between the 400 Bar and Palmer's, you got to meet all these musicians. They get done with their gig at the Extemp, or maybe they'd be playing here. They'd just be hanging out, like Willie Murphy and you and Dave Ray and Tony Glover and Bill Hinckley, who we miss dearly. And I walked up to you and I asked if I could buy you a beer and a bump, and you said sure, and I did. And I said, and I was thinking about your record with Willie Murphy in '68, Run and Jump and Stand and Still. I said, John, I said, you ever think about playing with the band again? And you paused, and he said, anybody can play with me. He says, I just can't play with anybody else. I went to the mountaintop, and then I had to contemplate that, oh great master. But it was great. Now let's talk about, you were at the '65 Newport Folk Festival when Dylan went electric.
That's right.
Now, were you guys playing them? Was that a Koerner and Glover gig too?
That was me and Tony.
Okay.
I don't know why Dave wasn't part of that, but yeah.
How crazy was that?
Well, actually, I just learned something that I had misunderstood. It was crazy, you know. There was people booed.
Yeah.
You know, behind the stage, I mean, meant you're behind a fence, so you couldn't see the audience, and vice versa. And I heard this booing and looked over, and it surprised me. And there were people who were very sad from it. But there was also at the time a rumor that Pete Seeger was looking for an axe to cut the cord. Now,
what a buzzkill, that Seeger.
I just read something, was in an interview with Dylan by Tony. I think that was what it was. But anyway, it turned out that Seeger liked what he was doing. And, you know, it's completely different than I thought it was,
Right.
some of it.
So all those myths get turned around over the years.
Yeah, well, that's true, yeah.
So, did you have a chance, because you were of the same time period, to hang out with like Paul Butterfield and Mike Bloomfield and all those blues cats? And of course, Mark Naftalin from the Butterfield Blues Band was a Minneapolis guy.
Right. Well, we crossed paths, but I didn't hang out with him.
Okay.
There's one thing I should mention, though, that you know, this is during the time when people were going down south to try and find the old blues players,
Right.
and get them to be on the circuit. And one of them they were looking for was Son House. And it turns out that Son House, while they were looking around down there, lived in Rochester, New York.
Right.
And unbeknownst to me, I was going to work and a few blocks away from, you know.
Wow.
But anyway, he was there, and I thought, well, I can go and talk to him. We're Rochesterians, you know.
Right.
So we went up and had a conversation for a while, and then I mentioned I was going to go to the liquor store to get something. He says, oh, you wanted me to get something for him. Well, something I hadn't understood was his manager at the time, Dick Waterman, had him monitored on that.
Right.
Only so much, help his hands settle down, but you know, anyway, he got drunk.
It's all your fault, Koerner.
Well, that's right. But the upshot of it was he had a workshop.
Oh, nice.
And in order to help him out, they put him on the stage with Muddy Waters.
Wow.
You know, so even though Waterman was pissed off at me, if it hadn't happened, they'd never seen that combo.
Right. And Muddy, of course, I mean, those were his guys, Charlie Patton and Son House and that Willie Brown and Robert Johnson. So that was really kind of a father and son moment in a way.
Yeah, all right, yeah.
I remember getting Son House too drunk to play one night.
What the hell was his name? He was a rant and raving preacher guy. doing all that righteous, religious, spiritual singing, and then he'd go back behind the stage and do up about a half a pint of Jim Beam, just like a glass of iced tea. His old lady'd be out there helping him out. Yeah, Fred McDowell, that was the guy's name.
It was interesting to see the famous people wandering around like Dylan Baez and Pete Seeger. And
in the so-called folk boom of the early 60s, they were maybe three of the first white guys, as they say, to gain any kind of notoriety for playing blues and for bringing the old country blues up, which of course then get immensely popular. And shortly after, when all the folklorists went down and discovered all the old blues guys, like Sunhouse and Skip James, the old black guys, and then of course would put down guys like Tony and Dave and John for being white guys playing the blues. You know, that's the white guy's burden, if you will. I've suffered it myself.
I didn't want to have anything to do with the folk, you know, the new folk deal or anything like that. Matter of fact, I didn't want to have anything to do with a whole hell of a lot of anything. I more or less wanted to play the guitar like, you know, like Buddy Guy says, I just want to play my axe, man. That's all I ever wanted to do.
So now there's a little bit, these stories I hear, you end up in Hollywood with Jack Nicholson.
Yeah, that was weird. My big shot at the big time, you know.
I heard he was delighted to meet you. He was a fan.
Well, that's not what I remember. I don't know if he was anyways, I was in the Triangle Bar, and I got a phone call from my booking agent. He asked me if I wanted to go and see Bob Rafelson, was it?
Jack Nicholson.
No, I mean the guy.
Oh, Bob Rafelson, yeah.
Yeah, the guy who made the movie.
The Easy Rider?
Right,
yeah.
Exactly. And I said, okay. So I went out there and got in a motel, and the next day I went up to his office, and I had a six-pack of beer. I think he was smoking dope, and we talked for an hour about movies and all that, at the end of which he says, well, nice meeting you, and that was that. And then when I went out, there was Nicholson there, and we shook hands, and I don't know what we said, but so I met him briefly. I had no idea that he knew who I was or anything, but. And that got done. I was supposed to get a flight later that day, and I thought, screw it, I'm getting out of here now. And so 48 hours, I went from Triangle Bar to Triangle Bar with a...
Jaunt in Hollywood in between.
Yeah, yeah, right.
So, well, just think, had you gotten that screen test, things could have been completely different right now. We would have been saluting you with all your Academy Awards.
Well, actually, I realized later that I didn't fit what he was looking for.
But you've always had a lifelong interest in film.
Sure, yeah.
And tell us about Mark Trias, who produced several later John and Tony records, re-released a video of the movie, was it called Sleep, that you did with Willie Murphy?
It's called The Secret of Sleep, which is the title of I forget, it's a Jewish guy who had a collection of stories, mystical kind of things. It was called The Secret of Sleep. That's what we named that. We put that together, we bummed some money from a couple different people, and we started it out here. We went to to Santa Monica, California, around there to shoot it, and then we edited out in Cape Cod. And although it was kind of cute, it's not what anybody expected.
It was, though, a real kind of a moment in time, though.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it was straight out 60s.
Yeah.
You know.
Somehow there seemed to be interesting things done with film, and I wanted to get in on it.
We broke up because Koerner didn't want to do it anymore, and what he told me at the time was he wanted to make films. That's when The Secret of Sleep film was starting. It was fun. We built the sets. John and I are fugitives in this movie, running through the hills and being chased by weird policemen. And we keep encountering different situations, strange situations, one of which was the ideal bar, and which was a bar outside that had everything you wanted. So me and John got to sit down and decide everything we would want in a bar and then go get it.
Wound up being a 1.5 year long project, during which time we went out to California to do some shooting. Did a lot of work around Minneapolis and did most of the editing out in Cape Cod, Massachusetts. Then finally the thing was finished, and it did show in 2 theaters, one in Boston and one in Minneapolis. I think it's a fairly interesting representative of how some folks were feeling in the 60s.
What was it like? Let's talk a little bit about Willie Murphy, who is, you know, kind of really, in a way, the mayor of the West Bank. When did you hook up with Willie? And tell us about playing and touring and making that great record, Runnin', Jumpin', Standin' Still.
I had been writing some songs that Jack Holtzman thought were interesting, and it was a step away from what I'd been doing. Did an interesting recording out there, which is very hard to find. It had, I forget the name, really well-known players along with me. And he said, why don't you come back to Minneapolis, put together a band, and work some of this stuff up. And I asked around, and somebody says, talk to Willie Murphy. And that was the beginning of it. And that was straight out the most creative part of my so-called career. And together we just worked on those things and came up with Running, Jumping, Standing Still. It was experimental time. You kind of learn from the Beatles that you can do anything,
Right.
And get it, if you can make it work.
I think some reviewer referred to it as psychedelic ragtime.
Well, it's got a bunch of interesting songs in it. One of them was in 5/4 time, and most of it, and then sometimes, never mind, it was all.
Someone told John and I was a good piano player, and he wanted to start a band. At that time, all the people on the folk scene were starting bands.
Willie was a person who could put a lot of the flavor into these things, and of course he was also, we got into where we were both writing words and music.
Well, there was 2 phases to me and John's playing together. The first was when it was just me and him, and we would fly everywhere on airplanes, and we always had a lot of money in our pockets and didn't worry about much of anything. He carried his guitar, and we each had a suitcase, and there'd have to be a piano at the gig, you know, and which we'd often have to repair. But basically, we had it really nice. And when you play the folk circuit, it's real different from the rock and roll world. People are nice to you on the folk circuit.
Eventually we got enough songs written to, we took them back to the record company, and they liked them, and so the deal with the record was on.
I've been running, jumping, standing still. I've been riding around like a buffalo bill, climbing a hill like Jack and Jill. I've been doing it all on my own.
Like somehow your life has been miscast? Well, I'll tell you, there's a place where that can change, Pat.
Amen, amen.
If your slack life has a certain lag,
Yeah?
you've been playing slapjack and collecting knickknacks, well, you better get back to neck and getting out of whack, Jack. Say goodbye and cheers to past years, and start your new career, my friends, by shifting gears. Whoa, the drinking and dancing all night long, early in the morning, yet it's still going strong. Well, the Red Palace is the name of the place. Happy times don't go to waste, you there.